Welcome back. It is 9:23 right now. February is Heart Health Month, and we are bringing you stories all month long on the impacts of heart disease. Doctors have long told us diet, lifestyle, major factors when it comes to maintaining a healthy heart. But what about other things? What about things like emotion and stress? Stress in particular is a big one for a lot of us. And joining us now is Dr. Joshua Buckler with the Swedish Heart and Vascular Institute. We really appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me, Casey. Appreciate it.
So let's talk about stress. When we think about heart disease, heart attack, things like that, we think of it in the physical way. We think,
Sure.
oh, I've got to change my diet, I have to start exercising.
Right.
What are the physical impacts stress can have?
Right. So outside of those things that we can directly feel, what's interesting is we know that the brain causes release of stress hormones. Stress hormones will cause increased blood pressure, increased weight gain, poor sleep. In diabetics, it actually can cause worsening diabetes, and all of those things can directly affect your heart health. And so these are all kind of running under the radar. We don't realize these are going on. We talk about high blood pressure being the silent killer. I mean, it's a really big deal that all of these issues are sort of smoldering in the background while we're feeling all of this emotional stress.
All people feel stress at some point in their lives. What is the potential long-term impacts to your physical health if you are consistently putting yourself in a stressful state?
Sure. So, I mean, I think the thing we're recognizing most is that we talk a lot about the fact that the body, human beings like stories. They like things put into boxes. And we talk a lot about the heart over here and the brain over here. We're starting to finally realize that all this works together. It seems so intuitive, but I think for a long time, doctors have thought of these things very separate. We separate out into subspecialties. And we're starting to realize it all works together. And so what ends up happening is that as the brain starts to work, we've recognized that areas of the brain that are associated with stress can cause inflammation in the body, and then that can cause the risk factors to worsen, and that can cause direct relationship to heart disease. So you can actually develop heart disease from just increased long-term stress. And it may be that actually emotional stress is way more impactful than physical stress.
Really?
We talk about people having stress tests and exercise and things like that, but it may be the emotional stress that actually may affect us way more than the physical stress.
I want to ask you a little bit more about the specifics, and this might seem pretty simple to walk through, but when I think about, okay, well, the brain releases a hormone, and then that impacts stress. Can you get a little bit more detailed as to how that is? We were talking before we started this segment. I'll just be open. When I was in my 20s, I had an anxiety attack, and I remember being really confused about why it felt like I was having a heart attack when I wasn't even stressed. I'd been extremely stressed the week prior. Where is that connection with the absorption of stress?
Sure. So we know that the brain will cause release of adrenaline and cortisol. So two very, very strong, powerful stress hormones in the body. We haven't always known exactly how that directly relates to the heart. What's interesting is we do know about the broken heart syndrome. We just dealt with this with Debbie Reynolds and Carrie Fisher.
Right.
And we know that people under severe sudden emotional stress can develop sudden heart failure. And it's an issue where we think it's probably an adrenaline surge that causes the heart to malfunction. It's very rare, but it's very, very serious when it happens. And so we've known that this has existed, but in more subtle terms, that's sort of the extreme event. But in more subtle terms, how has that been sort of affecting things? Well, there's a recent study out of Mass General that looked at the stress areas of the brain. And what they did was they used MRI to look to see how the activity of that area of the brain was in different people under different periods of stress. The higher the levels of stress, the more cardiovascular disease they developed down the road. And it looks like it has something to do with inflammation and something in the bone marrow. So we're starting to finally, we're working sort of from two different ends. We're starting to piece this all together. There's a lot we don't know still.
Right.
But I think we now have our first hard evidence that there may be a very close direct relationship between stress through the hormone through just to heart disease.
And a great example of why we should mitigate our stress levels for heart health.
Absolutely.
Doctor, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it. We're actually going to be talking with him more this weekend, so make sure you catch that on Q13 News this morning. We're going to talk a little bit about grief and how grief can impact heart health and a little bit more about things that you can do.